Hello, everyone, here on our UGASports.com YouTube channel. We have brought a lot of content to you this week, and we are happy to do so. It's a big week in the NFL draft. And if you scroll back previously, you can also hear Jim Donnan and I's interview with Mac Brown, UGA Sports Live yesterday. And then this is our last draft preview with me, Dane Young, and Brent Rollins from Pro Football Focus. We co-author Film Don't Lie on UGASports.com. We've got four more UGA players to discuss before the NFL draft tomorrow. That's Azeez Ojulari, Ben Cleveland, Trey Hill, and Trey Mckitty. And Brent, I know that the draft is here because you and I have just been texting random nuggets that come to our heads about what we project to be happening. I know it's an exciting time for you, especially with the Pro Football Focus preview content that now turns into, okay, it's here.
Yes, and it's fun. And I will say before we start, the interview you did with Coach Brown was awesome. Like, everyone who did not watch that should go back and watch that or listen to it on the podcast. You have to listen to that. He was so authentic and just so no coach speak. No, it was just straight to the point. It was a phenomenal job that was there. But yes, draft is here. It's fun. I've enjoyed the draft ever since I was a kid. I remember watching and writing down names, every pick, and just all that sort of thing. So ready to actually happen.
It is here, and technically Jacksonville's on the clock, although we think we know what they're going to be doing. We're here to talk about the Georgia guys first, and we'll get later in the draft as we go. Ever since we've started the discussions on this, and really since the process, Brent, there has been one Georgia player that I would say is virtually a consensus first-round pick. I'm sure there's some stuff out there that Azeez Ojulari may slide, but as a whole, when we look at Azeez Ojulari, I think most prognosticators have him going in the middle to the latter half of the first round. Is that what you're seeing from Azeez?
Very much so. And when you look at pass rushers, teams draft based on two things. All right, high level production, and then do the measurables match that, at least for what we do as a defense. And when you think about Azeez, the production is insane in terms of a per snap basis. Our pass rush grade numbers. If you look back at the past 3 or 4 drafts, the only players that are above him in their last season in terms of pass rush grade are Chase Young, Josh Allen of Kentucky, and then Nick Bosa. 3 guys who all went within the top 7 picks. And then in terms of guys who even went in the teens, like Brian Burns from Florida State, his pass rush grade higher in his last season. So that level of production, especially in the SEC, against an entire year of SEC competition, I think I just don't see how he falls out of the first round in terms of like where he goes. I think anywhere from New York, I've seen a couple of mocks with him at New York at 11, the Giants, and their known affection for Georgia players. And then as late as even 27 or 31 with the Ravens now having multiple first round picks. So I think he falls somewhere in that realm. It's just a matter of which, like New England. Like if you ask, and I know later we always do, he seems like to me, he feels like a Patriot or a Raven. Like it's just that style of play, fast, bend around the edge. Now in terms of the measurables, he's got really long arms. So I think that makes up for some of the height issues, but I just don't see him falling out of the first round.
Let's take a recap a little bit, and this is a screen share that we've done a couple of times, and we'll do it for this show too. Azeez Ojulari, 6'3", 240 pounds, from Marietta, Georgia. He did go to Marietta High School. Played in 27 games, which when you look at guys in the NFL draft, that doesn't seem like a whole lot. You have to remember that he really didn't play much early on. It was in the game against Texas that he really kind of had. That was his coming out party. That was his first game, and it built up from there. Obviously, fewer games in the COVID season last year. 71 tackles, 14 sacks, and 5 forced fumbles. When you look at his stats, Brent, what you see is he actually didn't rack up a ton of tackles, which edge rushers don't always do, so that's not a concern. But in terms of productivity and sacks and making the football get out of a playmaker's hands, he did his job very well in that regard.
And as best as anyone that Georgia's had for quite a while, since Leonard Floyd, Jordan Jenkins, just from a pass rush, he was the true edge for them. The ability to bend, quick first step, and from his sophomore year to then his junior year, the ability to use his hands and have a counter move that upped the ante a little bit. He went and got better there in the offseason. So from everyone that you talk to in and around the program and even other people, just a phenomenal kid who, the work ethic, all those sort of a Red Star player that Jeremiah referred to, like those, he is that kind of kid from everything that I've heard. So he's going to be a first round pick. It's a matter of where, I think.
Yeah, Daniel Jeremiah had him in the middle to latter half of his mock draft. You can scroll back on this feed and see our conversation with Daniel Jeremiah that we had to preview Georgia's draft eligible players. In terms of kind of Ojulari, what does he seem like? What team does he feel like? I agree with you, Patriots, Ravens. This is a slam dunk either way. My sneaky one for him, Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, very much so. And they've taken a lot of, and they signed a few, but then they've continually put resources into pass rush recently.
Yeah, I think he could really help them, though. I would kind of think the Packers are trying to maximize what's left of their Aaron Rodgers tenure. Assuming
you
that
would
continues.
think that, and then they took Jordan Love in the first round last year, so you would think that, but who knows?
Right.
We'll see.
When we move on to our next, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Azeez Ojulari because he will be Georgia's first player taken. Though I will say that the buzz I've seen, Tyson Campbell is getting a lot of love for late first round. So you never know.
And even Stokes. I've seen Stokes in multiple mocks as a late first rounder. And those two, and we obviously talked about them first in our series, but those two will be fascinating to me to see where they go, because does a run of corners happen in the 20s, and then people trade up or move up to get one because they want one of those guys. But also the DeAndre not played well, not done well in the NFL. And does that have any kind of lingering effects in terms of how Georgia plays its defense to then how it impacts people getting drafted from the school? I don't know. We'll see. But, I think those two will be fascinating to see where they pick.
Yeah, I think Georgia's going to have a lot of value in that. I mean, frankly, the teams that are competing, they draft later, and so they have to draft smarter. And so when you have late first round, and then once you get into second round, that's really where a lot of these champions are built. And so we'll have some strategy talk on that later in this, because I threw a take at you this morning that I'm really proud of, and I'm glad you agreed with.
Yes, very much so. Should be proud of that take.
Let's move on to Ben Cleveland, 6'6", 335 pounds, from Stevens County High School in Toccoa, Georgia. Seems like he's been at UGA for 8 or 9 years. It's actually not too much shy of that, if we're honest. Played in 45 games at UGA. Could have come back technically, but it's probably best for him to move on at this point. I know his life is just moving in a different direction beyond college, and Jeremiah had Ben Cleveland in his mock draft as a 4th round pick. I think the thing for Ben Cleveland is his most productive season was the last one. And if there are any concerns with him, because he was great, especially when you talk about some run protection, and his size got better in pass protection too. If there are concerns with him, is what took so long with that body. And is there a lack of focus? I think an NFL team that's looking for a body, 4th round would be a great value for him.
Actually, I think, to me, I don't see him falling past the 3rd round. And for one particular reason, he's really good in pass pro. Like, you think about him and the absolute just incredible Hulk-like physique that he has, that he would just be this dominant force in the running game. And he's really good. But he's actually been a better player the entirety of his career as a pass blocker. And that has such value in the NFL. And I'll never forget, he was in line the next line over at Lowe's one day, and he had shorts and a tighter t-shirt on. You just look and you're just like, oh my, that human is just a different level of human in terms of size and look. But he tested well, and I think he's going to be in that late third round mix for a team that's looking to improve themselves along the interior of their offensive line. When you think about his career, over, I think, right around 750-ish pass blocking snaps, he's only allowed 13 quarterback pressures. And even the more impressive piece of his game, so in all the time that he's played, 3 penalties. That's it. So very, very few penalties in his career. And like you said, it seemed like he's been here forever. I think the piece went up today re-ranking the 2016 class that Patrick Garvin did. He's in that class. So, I mean, in terms of players who have been around, he definitely has. But I think the best point was the first point that you made. His best season was his last. He stayed on the field the entirety of the season, was consistent week in and week out. And because of the previous years, it had been some great play, and then we don't see him for a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. So, I think having his best season as his last is going to benefit him greatly.
Their games don't necessarily align, but I do think the draft experience with Ben Cleveland is kind of falling similar to that of Solomon Kinley, to where you're a contributor for a long time, but later in your career, you just kind of solidified your spot in college on one of the best offensive lines in the nation, one of the most talented offensive lines in the nation. And again, their play is pretty different. I would say that they do things quite differently. They're built differently. But Solomon Kinley was a starter for the Dolphins. So Ben Cleveland could find himself to be a starter in the NFL next year. That is possible. I don't know how likely it is, but it's 100%. Possible.
What'll be interesting to see is if, like, in terms of, you think teams, one of the teams that, depending upon what they do, and if they end up having something later in the third round, maybe they trade back out of that fourth spot and get something later in the third round, pick up an extra third round pick, i.e. the Atlanta Falcons. Like that's a position with what Arthur Smith does with the outside zone game that they do. That's a team to me that could look at Cleveland because in terms of interior line help, I think they need someone, especially on the left side. Also Tennessee, the team that that Arthur Smith just left. But unfortunately, I don't think Tennessee is going to be drafting any offensive linemen from Georgia anytime soon.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that way based on a recent first-round picks hip-hop career that we've seen pop up on Twitter. No need to go into that. We do wish him the best, though. I hope that gets on track. Another offensive lineman trying to find his way into the NFL is Trey Hill, 6'4", 330 pounds. He was not at Georgia forever. Graduated in 3 years, played as a freshman. You really can't ask for more than what he gave in terms of both academics and then his play on the field. 36 games played from Houston County High School in Warner Robins, high school teammate of Jake Fromm, so they got to play together in college. When we spoke with Daniel Jeremiah, he had him in the 4th or 5th round. I would say more recent projections have Hill sliding a little bit further back than that, mainly because of lack of lateral mobility. I think a lot of teams have concerns that he can't move side to side in protection as quickly as you need to in the NFL. But when it comes to just experience, and we've talked about it all the time, he's got tree trunks for legs. And so there is a project there, especially for specific offenses, that if you just need someone that can kind of move upfield and move people, he can do that.
And the thing that will help him, I think, definitively get drafted is his ability to play center and guard. Like that versatility is a necessity in the NFL because of the little roster space that they have, and sometimes on game day they only have 7 offensive linemen. So it's that versatility I think will help him, 1, get picked, and 2, find his way onto a roster. But like you said, played from the get-go, very quality player. You don't see a lot of just elite tape, like where it's the dominant plays, but you do see just consistent play in terms of pass. I think he had 882 career pass blocking snaps, on 13 quarterback pressures, pass blocker, which by the way is a little easier to do on the interior. It's not like playing left tackle or right tackle, but still yet solid in pass protection and consistently there. Didn't miss much time. Really much of it in his career at Georgia, and then the ability to play both center guard, I think will find him. I agree that he's sort of going to end up being maybe a 6th rounder at best.
I actually think he might project better as a guard, and a piece of that is going to be there are going to be teams that are fearful of some of the errant snaps that he had in the last 2 seasons. And that's just something you can't do in the NFL. You can't kill drives that way because it's so hard when you get behind the sticks. So I could see him having a career somewhat similar to maybe a Ben Jones, where you take full advantage of what he got to Houston, got a second contract with Tennessee, and I think got a final one there. And I know he's approaching the end of his career, but very similar in terms of versatility. I think Ben was a little bit more consistent throughout his career. I think he probably had a little bit of a higher top end in terms of potential. But that's the mold that I think Trey Hill's trying to get into.
Like even just the Alabama game, if you rewatch him specifically in the Alabama game, there are a couple plays where he owns Christian Barmore, who's going to be a first-round pick, likely. Yeah. But then there are also a couple of plays where Christian Barmore puts him on his back. And so it's just that the inconsistency where you got a few good, really a lot of good, but a few in terms of on tape for him.
Yeah, and in a league where, you're attacking on outside zone a lot, you're going to need his footwork to improve dramatically to have any impact in that game in the NFL. He is more than a step slow in getting to an edge on any kind of like pulling center play. He's much better just right there in front of him, which, if you're going to move to guard, you're going to have to do some of that in the NFL.
Yes, sure. Very much so.
We have one more, and then we will kind of get back to general what we're thinking with UGA. Final player, Trey Mckitty, 6'3", 280-pound tight end, played at Florida State from high school, was IMG Academy. He's originally from Wesley Chapel, Florida. Played in 7 games for the Bulldogs, 6 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown. Daniel Jeremiah had him going in the 5th or 6th round of the NFL draft, the last that we spoke with him. I was a bit surprised by that based on what I saw from Trey Mckitty, but you and I were discussing it earlier. His Senior Bowl probably made him some money.
Very much so. He actually, we at PFF, we grade like the individual reps, the game, all the things associated with the Senior Bowl when it's included in the draft guide. He was the highest graded tight end at the Senior Bowl and dominated the Senior Bowl. Made a lot of just like tight window great catches within the Senior Bowl. I know our guy Anthony Dashner had a lot of video of some of those catches. So when you look at that, when you think about his numbers, like he had 6 catches. He had 6 catches on 9 targets, and you're looking at a guy who might get drafted. But the athletic profile, a very relatively weak tight end class for teams that look, and size, speed element that's there. I think you might find a team, especially like the Falcons, that use multiple tight ends, and other teams like the Ravens that use a lot of tight ends, that look at him in maybe the 5th or 6th round and say, all right, this is a guy who we saw it in the Senior Bowl. Let's see what more we can see out of that.
You and I have collaborated 2 full seasons now with Film Don't Lie on UGASports.com. A little bit before that, but in terms of a full series, that's the case in terms of our length. What's interesting now at this point is in the offseason, when Georgia adds a new player, especially transfer, we do a Film Don't Lie based on what they've shown in college. We don't do it as much with high school tape. There's too many variables involved with that to make a lot of accurate portrayals. But when you're going against ACC talent, you can tell a lot. And when you and I did our Film Don't Lie for Trey Mckitty as he was transferring to Georgia, there were a lot of red flags for me in terms of effort. And that could say as much about the culture of Florida State as anything, but he didn't do his part to help that, is what I would say. And it was a toxic offense to watch because, man, there was just trash everywhere in terms of people not wanting to get to places, head not in the game, some focus issues. I didn't see that at Georgia. So he did rectify that, and he was a valuable part of the offense. And I think teams are probably impressed by that. But if you're looking for red flags, even having that tape on your resume is going to be something I think some teams are going to look at and say, well, you didn't always give 100%. And even though the circumstances around you were poor, I mean, why would the Jets do that? Because could it be the same thing?
Right. Exactly. And that's when you think about the move that he made transferring to Georgia, the amount of, where he was versus where he is now, infinitely better. Better situation, and a great move for him. And really, when you think about the transfer portal and what the portal was, and I know you guys had a great conversation with Coach Brown about that the other day, but that to me is what the portal is for, is where, all right, I'm in a very bad, not the greatest of situations. Let me go grad transfer and go to a little bit better situation, better environment for my skill set, and then go show out. And that's what he did. And even when you think about, he only had 6 receptions, but as a run blocker, he was actually one of the highest graded run blocking tight ends in the country this past year. really all three of Georgia's tight ends, Washington, Fitzpatrick, and him were. And it's just something that's a strength of their game as a team and as a coaching staff. But when you have both good run blocking tape and the senior receiving, I think you're going to find yourself at least drafted. You're a draftable player now.
We missed our game on the previous two guys, so let's do this. Trey Mckitty feels like a blank. And for me, I kind of had him as a guy with like the Jaguars. Finding his way late in the draft. And maybe it's the Florida connection too, but I also think that the Jaguars just have so many needs in terms of playmaking that they'll be willing to take some swings on some some guys that have played a lot of football. And that's one thing that McKitty has is he's played a lot of games. And
for me, I would say the Rams. Mm-hmm. The way McVay uses their tight ends, a lot of 2 tight end sets with the, make a bootleg action, throwing to the tight ends in the short range. I think he seems like a Ram to me.
Trey Hill feels like a blank.
A Buccaneer.
Ooh.
And the reason I say that is in terms of how we quantify run blocking scheme, sort of big on big as a run blocking scheme, straight ahead blocking, just own the guy in front of you. The Bucs are the number 1 team in the NFL in that type of run scheme. So I think he feels like a Buccaneer to me.
I had him as a Bear. Kind of a similar principle.
Yes.
They need a little downhill running too, so I think they could use some help up front.
And wasn't the high school? Isn't the high school that him and Fromm went to? Aren't they the
Houston
Bears?
County?
I'm almost certain they're the Bears of some kind.
There you go. So maybe that's embedded in my brain. And then Ben Cleveland, what does he feel like?
I mentioned the Falcons, Titans, teams that I think he, as a sort of outside zone and as a heavy inside zone, the Bears are another one that use that frequently. So any of those teams that use those zone concepts, like a lot of what they did at Georgia, you think he's more of a power run blocker, but he's not necessarily been that. And he's kind of, I think, average in that realm. But the key for him is his ability to pass block, and I think that's what gets him drafted in the 3rd round.
I've got Ben Cleveland with the Raiders, and only because that's the franchise. They look at 2 things: how fast are you, and how big are you?
And that's a great call.
That's a great. He's a little bit faster than you think for his size. We saw that with his 40. So if you're going on who's impressive from the people that are 6'6", 370 pounds, boom, there you go.
I think that might be that's a very good pull. Very good.
Oh, I would. Great. That's wonderful. Let's talk some just general draft principles, because here's the take I texted you earlier. And we can talk Justin Fields in this if we want to, because he seems to be the enigma of this draft at this point. If he's actually a top 5 pick, that anyone that has covered him in college would say that's a top 5 pick in the NFL. And then all of a sudden, who was it? Chris Sims yesterday had him at 32. I'm like, come on. Come on. Yeah, you're just not watching the same thing I am.
And Sims is interesting because he did a podcast. He did one of the PFF podcasts, the guys that do the draft talk, and he did their podcast, and he explained his process of how he looks at and evaluates quarterbacks. And the thing for him that he's got in his pocket is that he had Lamar number 1 that year. Mm-hmm. He had Patrick Mahomes number 1 that year. He's had some sort of, in terms of how he's ranked quarterbacks, he's had some victories in that realm. And he actually, I want to say he had Kellen Mond ahead of both Trey Lance and Justin Fields in his QB rankings.
And he had Zach Wilson ahead of Trevor Lawrence.
Right. He had Wilson 1, Lawrence 2, Mac Jones 3. I think he had Kellen Mond 4, Lance 5, Fields 6 in his own QB ranking. So, I don't necessarily agree, but the guy played at the highest levels, son of an NFL quarterback, and looks at it in his own way. So until he's kind of proven massively wrong in that realm, I don't know, but I will say I don't agree. I think everything that you see from Justin Fields says he is a top 5 player. To me, it says he's a top 2 or 3 player. But what's interesting about it is, like, if you blindly, if you took away any elements and just put like a player A versus player B, and player A is 6'3", 225 with a 4.4 40. That's the most accurate passer in college football beyond 10 yards. Has the highest passing grade in a clean pocket of any passer. And, tough, all the intangibles are there. Like and was a top 2 recruit, top 5 all-time type recruit kid. Those things scream top 2-3 pick. But, it's going to be interesting to see. Now, if the 49ers take him at 3, everybody's going to be like, I get it. This was all smoke screen. This was all just a talk and all that sort of stuff. So, all the reports and all those things that you hear from the NFL Network guys and the Schefters of the world and the Ian Rappaports of the world, that all that was just talk. But if he doesn't, if he doesn't get picked 3rd, it becomes very interesting, because now you have the Falcons sitting there at 4 with Fields on the board, and then it just becomes very interesting. And I think that's actually good for the Falcons, by the way, that if it were the case, because if you do want to move back, him being there and being available is good for that value.
Yeah, because they'll have a whole ton of options. And in theory, with the new GM, new coach at the Falcons, the thought is you're not going to be this high in the draft anymore. So if Justin Fields is there, even if it costs you a little bit with your overall potential this season, what does it do for your entire tenure? Because if you screw this up, it doesn't set a good tone for 2 or 3 years, you being there, Arthur Smith or Fontenot or anything like that.
Yeah, for the Falcons, to me, I look at this draft where the 4th pick is its own little world, and then the rest of the draft is separate.
Yeah.
And because since they drafted Matt Ryan, they've only been in the top 10 3 times. None in the top 5. And one of those was because of the Julio trade. So they traded up to get into the top 10. So it's just not a world that they're used to being in, because they've had such a great quarterback. And they've actually, if you look back at one of our guys at PFF, looking at draft capital, how much draft capital has been used. And this is all picks, 1st through 7th round, on quarterbacks. Since the Falcons drafted Matt Ryan, they've used the least draft picks on quarterbacks of any team in the league. They haven't drafted quarterbacks. It's such a rarity that they've even done it. So
what you think about
it'll be interesting.
Long Shaw was the backup, So like even in terms of like backup role, they didn't need that. They had something they were comfortable with for a long time.
Yes.
And so I think that's a piece of it too. Here was the take that I texted you this morning.
Got to get to it. It's a good one.
This was independent of this. The draft has developed in such a way that I said top 12, but it's really closer to probably top 15. If you're not drafting a quarterback, a wide receiver, or, a generational tight end, Kyle Pitts, I almost put that in the receiver core. If you're not drafting that with one of your picks in the top 12 or 15, you're probably wasting some value there, because that's who's changing, doing game-changing things. And it's all about where is their depth at other positions. So like, should you draft a tackle in the top 5? Yeah, there are guys like Andrew Thomas out there that are probably worthy of that. But how much better are they than a guy that you can get in round 2 when you compare it to the difference of a Jamar Chase versus, one of these round 2 receivers? Well, Jamar Chase, it looks like he's going to be one of the better receivers in the NFL, period. Now, yeah, every now and again, you find DK Metcalf in the 2nd round. Great, you go get him. But, as many times as that happens, you do what New England has done with N'Keal Harry. So to me, those top 12, 15 picks, quarterback, receiver, tight end, and you did point out the lone exception to that should be some of those legendary pass rushers, the edge rushers, like a Chase Young, like a Jadeveon Clowney when he went, like a Myles Garrett. So I agree with you on that. But overall, the draft has really developed in a funky way, because I remember if you go back 10 years, if you drafted receiver number 2, people were turning their heads thinking, how in the world do you do that?
Right. And it's basically what you're summarizing is completely and utterly spot on. And there's a multitude of points here that we can make. One is that everything that we've just listed is affecting the passing game. Mm-hmm. Quarterback, receiver, tight end / receiver, edge rusher, or corner. Like if you have a truly elite corner, like Marcus Lattimore is the 12th pick for the Saints that year. That's a phenomenal pick. So those those players, if you're not picking those players in the top 15, the value is just not there. And the thing about the offensive line piece, Tristan Wirfs, like last year was an exceptional draft class for tackles. And I think Penei Sewell kind of fits and Rashawn Slater kind of fit in that mold a little bit as well. But like Tristan Wirfs was really, really good for Tampa Bay. But the thing with offensive line, and one of the things that we've shown at PFF is that offensive line play is not so much about having an elite guy as much as it is having 5 guys across the board who are solid and at least above replacement level players. Because if you have a weakness in an offensive line, in your offensive line, it will be attacked continually by defensive coordinators. So you're talking about, hey, and that's one of the things where you might see Sewell and Slater drop to 8 or 11, that kind of realm, because of that, because the tackle class is relatively deep. Hey, maybe I can get this guy at 45 that can be a very solid, just as good. And I don't need the elite, basically, is what you're saying with that. But the other thing, the last point with that is, and I think that makes your point spot on, is that where is the college game now? The college game, the best programs and the top 10 programs in the country are now all, for the most part, offensively driven. So now you got the best recruits and the best players in the top programs, and from in an offensively focused world. That is now leaning to where it's just passing game dominant and offensively dominant game.
Well, and I think that there's an order of operation with how you get to this level. It starts with the quarterback, the person that touches the football most. It's not that complicated. If you don't have a quarterback that can orchestrate an offense that wins a Super Bowl, then you need to draft another quarterback, and you need to keep doing that until you get it right. It's one thing that the Bears struggle with, that they didn't pull the trigger away from Trubisky soon enough. They should have known after one season. Nope, he can't do it. That's not going to work. Jets, same thing. If I'm the Panthers, I still draft another quarterback in the first round.
Next point, I was thinking that exact same thing. And if you're the Falcons and you don't take QB and you watch your division rival now have 2 relatively young quarterbacks that they can find out which one can be good, and you have an offensive coordinator that, by the way, you actually tried to hire as your head coach as well, or you interviewed for your head coaching spot, so you think highly enough of him, that's an interesting dilemma that the Falcons are going to be put into if they don't go QB. Because I think you're right. Carolina does go QB.
The Falcons don't need to look further than their fiercest rival. Look at what the Saints have gone through with an aging quarterback that's now gone. The Saints do not have a good quarterback situation for the upcoming season. They're just hoping and praying that Jameis Winston finds some form and doesn't turn the ball over a ton, but they didn't really have a plan.
Hey, he got LASIK. He got LASIK. He's a lot better.
And there's Taysom Hill's there too, but again, I don't think either of those guys orchestrate an offense and win a Super Bowl. So if the Saints were in the top 15, they would be drafting a quarterback too. And in fact, they should probably have considered making a trade like the 49ers did to get up there to have that opportunity. But that's for another day, for me marrying into a family of Saints fans that hears about this all the time. All to say, there's a couple things happening in the NFL, and those top 12, 15 picks, it should be those 3 positions, quarterback, and then anyone that receives the ball. The other thing that's happening, and we talked about this with Coach Donna on UGA Sports Live yesterday, a bit of a resurgence in the running back position, where it was almost unconscionable in the last couple of years to draft a running back in the first round. I think that that's changing for the ones that are quite an asset in the passing game and can do multiple things. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was that. From everything I'm seeing, Naji Harris is probably rising into the latter part of the first round.
I think he will. And what's interesting about Naji specifically is how he developed over his time at Alabama and became a pass receiving threat. But the interesting thing about him, and that's personally, I would not take him in the first round at all for one reason. He's already 23.
Yeah.
You're getting one contract out of him. That's it. Like, for example, Javonte Williams from North Carolina is 20. Like, that's a totally different ball game for me when you look at someone who's already 23 at that position. But I agree with the overarching point that, especially when you late first, early to middle second round, you're going to have when there are good players there available from evaluation standpoint and a prospect standpoint, they're going to get picked. So you're going to see those 3 backs in the top 45, probably top 50 at worst.
Well, and so that's the order of operation, right? Get your quarterback set, get them some weapons at receiver and tight end, and then you can do what the Chiefs did and have a pick to get Clyde Edwards-Helaire late in the first round. But that's only because you had Mahomes set, you had Kelsey set, you had Tyreek Hill, and then a group of 3 other receivers.
Yep.
When the Chiefs drafted Mecole Hardman, it was a surprise. Not that they drafted him, but that he got drafted when he did. And that's because the Chiefs, for a long time now, Andy Reid, they've prioritized those offensive weapons. And so how other teams in the NFL haven't figured out, this is the discussion with the Falcons. If you're not taking quarterback, you better take Kyle Pitts because your offense needs it. And you just need as many weapons out there for Matt Ryan to extend his career as you can.
I would agree. To me, if they pick a player and it is not a quarterback at 4, it has to be Pitts. It just has to be, to me.
Regardless of what happens with Julio Jones. Obviously, if Julio's still there, your offense is even more explosive.
If you can find a way there next year.
Yeah, if you can find a way to move that contract and get value out of it, great.
That's fine. You're not going to get the trade value. You're going to, like when you think back, Randy Moss was traded for a 4th round pick at age 30.
Yeah.
Julio is already 32. You're not getting value.
And not a team friendly contract.
No.
Yeah. That AJ Green signed for $8 million kind of quietly with the Cardinals.
Yeah.
And they were the same draft class.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Overall, we're excited about
what's
this
interesting,
draft.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And because when we talk about all these offensive things, and all the Georgia players are either linemen or defensive players. So it'll be in the coming years that you see the Georgia weapons and on the offensive side come into this draft round.
I'll tell you, this time next year when we're discussing where does George Pickens rate after the ACL, and that's going to be an interesting discussion. And I can promise you that the second this draft is over, there are going to be people in these NFL organizations whose their job to start looking at next year's class and get that set and start doing that research, because the stuff that we get and the access we get for the Georgia guys, it's that extreme for everyone in the NFL draft. Do you have any picks that you think are kind of the linchpins? I know the Falcons we've talked about a lot, but I look at what the Bengals decide to do in terms of receiver, offensive line, the Broncos if they wanted to trade up. We talked about the Panthers. To me, it seems like there's about 4 teams in the top 15 or so that can really determine where this draft goes.
That's because of you've got 5. You've got 5 quarterbacks who, from a skill set and production standpoint, legit deserve to be up there. It's not like the years of Christian Ponder, Brandon Whedon's in the world that are getting pushed into there because they have some stats and teams need quarterbacks. These are legit big time prospects athletically and then production wise and arm talent, all the things that go with that. So that's what makes this draft fascinating. I love the back and forth of the 49ers are thinking this, they're thinking that. Who knows what they do, because we got to drum up interest for a broadcast, which, or not necessarily drum up interest, but keep it interesting for a broadcast. And who knows what they do at 3. I think what that to me is a big fascinating point, because Kyle Shanahan actually gets to pick his quarterback. All these years he's been an offensive coordinator, he's never. I don't know that they've ever really drafted a quarterback that he's then played. Kirk Cousins was already there when they in RG3. They kind of got those guys and he came aboard. Obviously in Atlanta with Matt Ryan, Cleveland, the year he was in Cleveland, he had Ryan here. So with Francisco, they got Garoppolo. They kind of traded for Garoppolo, but that was them just making the best of what they could. So he's truly getting to be at the top of the draft and pick a QB. So does he go Mac Jones? Does he go the sort of more high-end talent that we think with Fields and Lance? Who knows? I tend to think it will be Lance. I tend to think that he's going to, because I just think he watches North Dakota. I bet he watches North Dakota State's offense and says, all right, that guy from a ceiling standpoint can run my offense at the highest level. Maybe that would be my.
I love the confirmation bias that happens with Shanahan now, because he's reached almost a Belichick level. We're like, oh, Belichick did that. Even though it doesn't make a lot of sense on paper, it must be the smart thing to do. And so any other team in the draft, if they traded up and gave up assets for the next 2 years to get Mac Jones, I think everyone would scoff at them and say, that's ridiculous. How could you do that with all these other players on the board? But if Shanahan does it, with his track record with quarterbacks and what he looks for, I think he'll get a little grace on that. And people will be like, well, like you said, he picked it. That's what he wanted.
There's one point that when you think about it, though, that's interesting. And now, obviously, that they had to give up the draft capital to get there, but they have a really good roster.
Yeah,
top to bottom, just a lot of just good players, especially along the defensive line. I mean, they're 2 years removed from being in the Super Bowl. I wonder if they're looking at this of, all right, I want to get the guy, and if it is Mac, and they say I want to get Mac because I think he can, week one operate my offense at a high level. Or if Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt, that guy's and we keep him and that. But we're going to do this for 2 or 3 years, 4 years, and then we're going to go get another guy. That kind of strategy, like we were talking about earlier, where it's like, all right, we're going to get a guy who's ready to go, mentally can play in our system, and we know that. And boom, 2, 3, 4 years later, we're going to go get another guy. Who knows? I'm waiting for a team over a 10-year period to do that, to be like, all right, I'm going to spend all my money elsewhere and just draft quarterbacks early, and go for a 2 or 3 year span, see what I can get, and then do another one or two.
A team that should be doing that after this season, if things continue at least the trajectory that we saw, the Dolphins. The roster is great. And so if the Dolphins wake up after next year and they don't believe in Tua to the extent that they probably ought to for where he was drafted, then yeah, go get another. Keep doing it.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, to kind of bring this back home,
I was going to say to the Georgia guys, how many do you think get picked?
So there's 11 draft eligible. We've talked about them all in our 3 pieces of this you can find here on this YouTube channel. I said yesterday on UGA Sports Live, I think 9 would get picked, which would be a record. And the majority of those will be later round, somewhere between 4 and 7. I think 3 get picked in the first 3 rounds. I think you've got it at 4 in the first 3 rounds.
I think 4 go in the first 3 rounds.
I think 9 get picked. I could see as few as 6 or 7. As many as all. I think it's going to be pretty hard for every one of them to get picked. But if you're 7th round or free agent, we always talk about, would you rather choose where you go? And I've heard that be the case too. You asked for a number. Yes. I'm going to say 9.
I'm going to go one more. We're going to, just so I can be different, I'm going to say 10.
Wow.
I think 10 get picked. And to me, in terms of the order which they get picked, I think it'll be Aziz, Stokes, Campbell, then Cleveland, then DJ Daniel. I think DJ Daniel was the 5th guy picked. Then Monty Rice, then Mckitty. And I do think Herring and Hill and LeCount get into that 6th, 7th round realm and get picked because of the tape that they put on display, independent of either injury with Herring or workout/injury with LeCount. And I think Mark Webb is the only one that I could see maybe not getting drafted, but I could also see him getting drafted and being 11 because of his phenomenal ability as a special teams player.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go 10.
Yeah. Either way, it's good
setting
for Georgia.
A record, right? In that.
I mean, the way that Georgia's recruiting and the way that Georgia performs on the field, that record should keep getting bumped up year after year after year after year, especially as some of these offensive weapons develop, because it's been a ton of running backs. But Georgia is getting a higher grade of receiver than it used to. And so I think you're going to start seeing, when I've texted you about this, the last, 5 national champions, the average is a 1st-round quarterback and 2 first-round receivers, heavily weighted by Alabama in 17 and then LSU in 19, where I think it was 4 receivers on the Alabama roster and 3 for LSU. Does Georgia have 2 first-round receivers and a first-round quarterback? I don't know. We'll have to find out. There's a lot of development to happen. I don't particularly think so with this class, but there's not enough info to make that call. It's possible. I can tell you that next year's quarterback class, at least on a glance, is lighter. And so there's room for someone to have a great season and jump up there.
When you think, and this is one point that I thought about this today, actually. Guess who's going to be the likely number 2 pick?
Next year,
the guy who literally would know this year, Zach Wilson. He wouldn't even exist. Like, just think if football hadn't happened in this past year and everything got canceled. Yep. Where would Zach Wilson? They would be going back to tape, his previous year's tape, his sophomore tape, and being like, maybe, and he ends up being picked in like the 3rd round. Like, it's amazing what you can do, like what Burrow did, same sort of thing in 1 year. And when you put it on tape like that in 1 year and you put it yourself in an offense, it can be great change within that quarterback draft class.
When it clicks, and that's receivers too. Jamar Chase initially committed to Kansas, right? So he didn't play this last season. He's going to be a top 7 pick, and he's going to be a game changer in the NFL for whoever gets him. I'm excited for the draft, Brent. I think we're going to plan to do one of these next week and recap where the Georgia guys went. So that will be on here. If you have questions for us, you can send those on Twitter. It's probably the easiest thing. At Dane Young is just my name, DAYNEYOUNG. And yours is at PFF_Brent, or am I reversing that the wrong way?
That's correct.
Boom.
No, that's correct. That's correct. Good job. Good job by you.
Yeah, good job by you. Now we're doing Bill Simmons and Cousin Sal. All right, this is great. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure you're checking out what we're doing over at UGASports.com, both in terms of recruiting to kind of see who will be the next wave of NFL draft guys. In fact, there's a whole discussion to be had, and maybe we should do this on a separate podcast one day, where the reason quarterbacks are able to do what they do is because the 7-on-7 work and the specified camps. That's all relatively new in the last 10 years. And so I think that's why you're seeing so much high-end quarterback talent. We'll save that for another day. For Brent Rollins, I am Dane Young. Thank you for supporting what we do at UGAsports.com.